Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for another poetry discussion that comes to us from Charles Bukowski. This is a poetry discussion that will exist in 3 separate playlists here on the channel. Number 1 being the poetry discussion playlist, obviously. Number 2 being the National Poetry Month 2021 playlist. I will have a poetry discussion every day in the month of April of 2021 here, so there will be a playlist for that, but also we're going to go poem by poem through what matters is how well you walk through the fire, which is a little bit about what this poem today is about. But yeah, there will be a poem by poem review for what matters most is how well you walk through the fire. I am not sure exactly how fast this is going to happen on the channel. There are a lot of poems in here, but today's poem, the second poem in this series, is Legs, Hips, and Behind. Now, being Charles Bukowski, I think we all know where this is going, but not completely. Not completely. It won't completely go there. This poem goes some weird places. We liked the priest because we saw him buy an ice cream cone. Yeah, I'd already told you this has to do a little bit with how well you walk through the fire. It's called Legs, Hips, and Behind. And the first line is, we liked the priest because we saw him buy an ice cream cone. It's a weird poem. We liked the priest because we saw him buy... We liked the priest because once we saw him buy an ice cream cone. We were 9 years old then, and when I went to my best friend's house, his mother was usually drinking with his father. They left the screen door open and listened to music on the radio. His mother sometimes had her dress pulled high, and her legs excited me, made me nervous and afraid, but excited somehow, by those black polished shoes and those nylons, even though she had buck teeth and a very plain face. When we were 10, his father shot and killed himself with a bullet through the head. But my best friend and his mother went on living in that house. And I used to see his mother going up the hill to the market with her shopping bag, and I'd walk along beside her, quite conscious of her leg and her hips and her behind, the way they all moved together. And she always spoke nicely to me, and her son and I went to church and confession together, and the priest lived in a cottage behind the church, and a fat, kind lady was always there with him. When we went to visit, and everything seemed warm and comfortable then in 1930, because I didn't know that there was a worldwide depression, and that madness and sorrow and fear were almost everywhere. This is a weird poem on a lot of levels. It's hard to understand exactly what that priest is doing at the beginning of this poem. But the reason that priest is at the beginning of the poem is because our speaker has a guilty conscience. Our speaker has a guilty conscience because he goes to confession with his friend, the friend whose mother he's lusting over, the friend whose father had killed himself. So that is the underlying reason for the priest beginning the poem. It's one of these things, sort of like, do you know the best way to tell if someone's afraid of you? They tell you they're not afraid of you. We're leading with that hesitance. I had a psychology professor once who said that the best way to tell if someone is sexually unconfident, if they have no sexual confidence, is if they lead with sex. Why? It's counterintuitive, but it's because they have to put it out there. They have to put on the game face, put on the war paint in order to make those things make sense to themselves. And that is how they end up doing it, is by hyping it up to themselves. Bukowski is hyping up that priest to us because it is his self-conscience, which is running amok. It's a weird poem all the way through because we end with the depression. But the specter of the bad time, sort of like in horror novels, you often have the specter of the bad place. In it is the what is it called? The Badlands? What is it's not the Badlands? That's a Disney term. It's it's like the creek, right? I can't remember what it's called, but it's the area. And then there's 9 Neibolt Street. There's that place too. There's the bad place. There is a specific room in The Shining. I don't know why only Stephen King is coming to mind, but in Bukowski, there is always the specter of the bad time, which is unique. It is interesting because the bad time does not seem to be beholden to any man. The bad time is something which will ruin you. But if you keep going, the bad time may not. The bad time, in fact, does not. The bad time never does. And here we have the mention of the Great Depression. There was a worldwide depression, and that madness and sorrow and fear were almost everywhere. Again, we have to probably credit this depression with our speaker's friend's father's suicide. We're led to believe that because it's mentioned here, right? It was weird that everything seemed warm, but they didn't know why. It was weird because everyone was afraid. There was madness everywhere, and almost everyone was afraid or was sorrowful. So that is, we're painting the scene here. Bukowski's very roots are in the bad time. Now, if we're going to extend this to a full-on poetry discussion, a discussion of things further out beyond the poem, of real-world stuff, we have to see that we are in danger of the bad time here. Here in 2021. I think we're in danger of the bad time. And that's why we're always on the precipice, right? Civilization is always on the precipice of the bad time. But this is one of the reasons that I think Bukowski will always be readable is the movie Clue had people holding signs about the end is nigh, right? And that movie was 1985. There have always been doomsayers. And the reason there have always been doomsayers is because there's always been doom, right? So someone willing to forecast the doom in the current time to the current people is going to get listened to, is going to get attention. Bukowski never really does that. Bukowski is pretty much always appreciative of the fact that the bad times are somewhere. It just depends on whether or not you're in them. Bukowski's very appreciative of the fact that the bad always exists. But Bukowski sort of plays it up like the Sunday papers, where there was a cloud over our good character, the funnies, right? Here we have a mention of the worldwide cloud, a worldwide depression, and that madness and sorrow and fear were almost everywhere. But they're not everywhere. And here we have peaks to the good. Whenever they went to visit the priest who lived in a cottage behind the church. So this bad time doesn't have to exist everywhere, but you don't get to control it, it seems. And there's a lot of... So the father character here committed suicide. There's a lot of people through Bukowski's poetry that do not control the bad time. I'm trying to think of the title of a different poem The Last Ride of the Suicide Kid, something like that. I can't remember the exact. It's the poem in which we get the phrase, "My eyes rolled to the dark part of my skull." In that poem, Bukowski is ridden of all use, of all. He can't do anything for himself, and he's suffering through that because he cannot, Suicide Kid, remove the bad side, remove the bad times for himself. Autonomy. He did not have autonomy for himself. But this is a weird poem. And I'm not sure what to make of it. It seems that what we're doing is sort of forecasting the rest of Bukowski's life. Because we have the idea, the specter of sex, we have the specter of suicide, we have the specter of the bad time, and we have the specter of maybe two-timing a friend. Not physically harming the friend, but two-timing him in some way, in some fashion. So yeah, this is a weird poem. I'm not sure what this means for the rest of the collection, but legs, hips, and behind. And the poem's not completely about that. The poem's about two-timing your friend. But the poem's not completely about that. The poem's about, a worldwide depression. But the poem's not really about that. The poem's about a friend who lost his father to suicide, But the poem's not really about that. The poem's about seeing a priest buy ice cream, But the poem's not really about that. What is this poem about? That is all I have for this poetry discussion. Look, every day of this month, I will have a poetry discussion on the channel. I've got a day for Langston Hughes, a day for Emily Dickinson, 2 days for Bukowski, a day for Plath, a day for Frost, Robert Frost, because I'm a crusty old son of a bitch, and a day for random poems. So I hope to have you back for the rest of those poetry discussions.